Hi ladies and gentlemen, I am Vitold, and in this video I'm guiding you through my experiences and a comparison of the new BMW R1300 GS and its closest rivals that came on top in my all big adventure motorcycles comparison from some time ago. That video is linked in the description, but only now after getting the new GS from BMW I'm able to put it against all those. And those others are now Triumph Tiger 1200 GT that took second spot, while now Triumph also added an electric suspension lowering option, so a similar system to the one found in the new GS, but having 2 centimeters of travel instead of 3 like in a BMW. There's here also a Ducati Multistrada V4 that actually was an overachiever in the largest number of categories before. There is a KTM 1290 Super Adventure in the S variant, as overall it scored more points than the R, which in fact I would personally choose over the S because of sitting position and low speed handling. And the last one here is the previous BMW R1250 GS, to give you a more mathematical point of reference, let's call it, since I've already compared the new 1300 to this 1250, but now it's with all the data and the scores. So let's go. And first thing to say is that everything is always subjective, and so you will see my perspective, while every single one of you guys may have a different one. Let's keep that in mind, and before making any definitive choices and decisions, please do test the considered motorcycles yourselves. But if your preferences are similar to mine, this video should help you pinpoint areas that may interest you the most, and later to know better what to expect, or maybe even how to narrow down your choice. Now, this comparison is again divided into very separate categories, and I will not be summing up some points, as the importance of those categories is to us very different. I care about sound a lot, while some of you don't at all. I don't care much about the fuel tank size or even fuel consumption, so we cannot give these the same weight. Instead, I will give you my overall preference and rank, while I will indicate which motorcycle does it best, in my opinion, in a given specific category. I think this is the most fair way of doing it. No one motorcycle being best for everyone is gonna work. That's why it's so many of them, and they do sell, and people love their bikes. I won't be riding these monsters through the mud and on the rocks. So the first area of comparison is suspension comfort, as these are adventure motorcycles often used on longer trips, and in general people who ride them, like myself, like to have it as comfy as possible. Here, to me, the least comfortable suspension-wise, but in fact mostly in line with the others, is Ducati Multistrada V4, which I rode in the V4S trim. It is getting 7 out of 10 points, so a lot. But the next 3 motorcycles holding places 4th, 3rd and 2nd, I also feel they are basically on the similar level, and they also get 7 points. And now the one that feels slightly more comfortable than the Ducati is, to me, the new BMW R1300 GS. Then there would be the previous R1250 GS, and in the second place there's KTM 1290 Super Adventure S, and on the top we've got the Triumph Tiger 1200 GT with 9 out of 10 points, so more than all others, which not only has the largest range of electric suspension adjustment and can go from the most, I feel, soft setting and comfortable to still pretty stiff, but you can change the settings super fluidly right there in the main menu, instead of having to dig into the suspension modes and changing their settings inside the modes. It now also can have that lowering option known from Harley Davidson Pan America Special and the new R1300 GS. Now, KTM has some pretty advanced suspension functions, like an anti-dive function. I feel it can become more comfortable than both BMWs, but in terms of preventing front end dive, it cannot match BMWs. It's not as great there. It's just as a side note here, since we're talking mostly about comfort. Triumph Tiger 1200 wins. The next area to consider is engine and performance, where it's not only about power but also about how accessible it is, how smooth and enjoyable the whole experience is. So to me, the least enjoyable it is on an R1250 GS that feels and sounds like an old man rolling down the stairs. Now, well, don't get me wrong, it's quick enough with plenty of power and loads of useful, actually very useful torque that makes it take off instantly. That all would be just great if I was riding in earplugs and wearing some vibration-free gear from the future. The vibrations themselves are not a problem, but the whole experience is just tiring, sort of, and not exactly encouraging to me. 136 horsepower and 143 newtons of torque move this bike just fine. Now a bit more agile here, but mostly thanks to a reshaped dynamic riding mode is a BMW R1300 GS. Now in a regular road mode there is not much of a difference between the two BMWs, as the power here in the new one is bumped up to 145 horsepower while the torque is at 149 Newton meters. That is a lot, and it's all also available very low, but the experience of the Boxer engine is basically the same. Both get 6 out of 10 points from me here. So does Ducati Multistrada V4, that is much more powerful, having 170 horsepower and 4 cylinders in a V setup instead of 2 like in BMWs. Ducati has got less torque though, as 125 is what it's got, so you will have to rev it more to get to the power, but it's a quicker bike that doesn't complain when being pushed. Its main limitation is short gearing that prevents you, especially at lower speeds, to play with all that power, as you've got to change gears pretty much instantly if you really want to push it and accelerate. All of these can have quick shifters as well, but it's still kind of a, let's call it a bumpy experience on a Ducati because of that. Now the second limitation are the consequences of such aggressive riding on a Ducati, which are fire. Almost literally, the bike gets super hot to the point of it bothering me. But better here is, in my opinion, Triumph Tiger 1200 with 150 horsepower and 130 newtons of torque, available easily throughout the range. Gearing here is better and the ride is more relaxing, while you can actually use all that power, I think, more flexibly without your left foot getting crazy with the gear lever. I just love to complain about Triumph's quick shifter, which to me is slow, but there are no heat issues and just a bit of vibration that, well, they don't bother me that much in this bike. But there is smooth power delivery of the 3-cylinder engine. There's a lot of performance. I feel it is significantly quicker than both BMWs, so it takes the second place with 7 points out of 10. But the master sitting on the throne is a KTM 1290 Super Adventure S with the same 2-cylinder V-shaped engine as in the R variant. In the S, there is a pretty bad tire. In the rear, it spins in place instead of shooting the bike forward, so you'll do well by replacing it with a better one, even like in the R. But here, it's 100% of fun, joy, and no effort in accelerating. 160 horsepower, 138 newtons of torque, great gearing, no heat issues, no crazy vibration, just the king of the segment in this category to me. The only one out of the bunch that makes me very excited, in fact, here. 9 points out of 10 and a winner here. Now let's move to low speed handling, where KTM now well sits on the last place. 5th spot, also just with 5 points out of 10, as it doesn't seem to like this sort of riding. The handlebar fights with you a bit and is not that easy to turn, so you yourself are getting more out of balance in comparison to others here, and it's not as stable and precise to steer. It's actually not very good in this S variant when it comes to low speed handling. Ducati Multistrada V4 feels like a relief in comparison with it and does pretty well here, scoring 7 points, sitting in the 4th place. It's quite good with proper balance and control. However, I feel that the Tiger 1200 GT is better here, but not enough to get more points, so it's getting also 7 from me, but it sits before the Ducati. It somehow just feels a tiny bit more manageable to me in neutral, in low speed situations. The new BMW R1300 GS feels just enough better and more under control here to get 8 out of 10 points and to land on the second spot. It's even more neutral, it is quicker to respond to changing directions and feels less top heavy. But I believe that it's not as impressive still as its predecessor, so our 1250 GS. I mentioned that in my previous video with comparison of these two BMWs, and the old 1250 just puts a smile on my face every time I've got a chance to ride one. It's simply incredible for such a large piece of metal to move with such ease and to be so encouraging, which is the key here. It feels almost like flying, even though I can only fly in my dreams, but it's like there are no obstacles for this bike when riding slowly. It reacts instantly to anything you attempt to do with it and it helps you with it, while also being able to ride perfectly straight at even the lowest speeds, which is great for filtering. It is an absolute master of precise riding and definitely the most fun, so it gets 10 out of 10 points here from me. This will also matter in the last two summary categories, so city riding and touring, that we're heading towards as the two main points that sum up everything else. But before that, there is high-speed handling, and well, competition is strong, while KTM also here is the last in my opinion. It's not bad, it gets 7 points out of 10. It follows the command nicely and with no resistance at speed. It's not the quickest to respond, but it does it all well. I feel that the Tiger 1200 GT does it better and is easier to, for example, tighten the turn. It also feels to me slightly more, let's call it, secure at higher speeds. We may play with suspension settings that will matter here, but somehow I prefer the feeling that the Tiger 1200 GT gives me at higher speeds. It has 8 out of 10 points and is in the 4th place. Also 8 points are there for Ducati Multistrada V4 that feels stiffer and give an impression of being more planted on the road. To me it does feel more secure there, even more, and so it's in the 3rd place behind two BMWs. Here I've given 9 out of 10 points to our 1300 GS, and it got me thinking that it's perhaps a bit of pressure, while in fact it doesn't seem to me all that nicer or more nimble at higher speeds than the Multistrada. Or maybe it's that lowered seat that there was on the trophy trim that I was testing, and riding position wouldn't suit me that well. I'll blame the lowered seat here and stick to the opinion of the 2nd spot here being deserved by it. Not that much has changed in comparison to the R1250 GS, so it should be just as good or even perhaps better as it's lighter and just, well, newer. But to me, it's not. It just somehow does not feel as good as the 1250. The 1250 feels again like it encourages you to push it and ride faster and faster, while I don't have that while on the 1300. Again, maybe it's that seat. I'm 1 meter 83 centimeters tall or 6 feet tall and feel way too cramped on this 3 centimeter lowered seat. Now, regardless, my absolute winner with a 10 out of 10 points here is the BMW R1250 GS. This way we go to the 5th category, so seat and position comfort. And I like it soft and cozy, and so the motorcycle that lets me sit for the longest without my bum getting sore is automatically a winner here. A good indication of that is my Well 7 G11 electric office chair that you may see at powerseats.eu, and which is an absolute work of art. Super adjustable and hence super comfortable to anyone who's not 3 meters tall or 1 meter tall. Take a look. Also on a motorcycle, I like an upright position, which all of these here provide. I'm definitely the least comfortable on KTM's super hard seat that isn't shaped the way that would allow for a perfect fit in my case. I can't really last even an hour without just feeling not okay on it. It's pretty bad actually, and on top of that the foot pegs are too high for my liking, and in the end it gets 4 out of 10 points here. Then there is much better new BMW R1300 GS, which again, let me mention that I got with a lowered seat. That's hard to touch, but it's surprisingly good to sit on for long. So this is an example of harder but well-shaped and generally, to me, good seat, and it gets 6 out of 10 points. It's also got a wider handlebar than KTM, which is fine for me, but doing tight maneuvers may become challenging, as you may need to lean forward to follow that one of the grips that goes forward when doing those sharp turns. Same applies to the other GS. It's especially visible when doing U-turns. Here it also seems to be a slight lean forward on this 1300. The knee angle doesn't fit me well too. Well, again, that seat. However, I've sat on a bike with a standard seat, and it also feels more cramped to me, which is not how I like it with my size. And that's why I prefer the R1250 GS with a softer seat. On a 1250 GS, the knee angle seems to be more relaxed, and I have never noticed any lean forward, so it fits my preference better here. Note that on the 1300 you may buy an Enduro Pro pack with adjustable foot pegs, but it's still not clear to me if it means that they can be further lowered or not, so I don't take it into account at this point. Now, as for points, 7 points for the R1250 GS from me here. Then there is the Multistrada V4, which seems to have a seat that suits me even better. It provides an upright position with a relaxed knee angle, and you won't feel cramped on it at all if you're my size. And here come 8 points out of 10, and the second spot in the category for it. The master of comfortable position is the Tiger 1200 GT with a nice, wide and soft enough seat and a very natural to me position. Everything about the way I can sit on it is the best out of the bunch, so I'm giving it 9 out of 10 points, and this is here my winner. If you would like to know more details, later head up to my full reviews of each of these motorcycles that are linked in the description. You will know everything that I've got to say about them after testing them all. Now, moving to the wind protection category, we've got to disregard the KTM here, as the dealer that I rented it from had the original windscreen replaced with a short one from the R version, so there was no wind protection at all. What's great is that there is a fairly quick and easy to use adjustment system on a KTM with 2 knobs on both sides, out of which you may use whichever you prefer to reach with either hand. Not bad generally, but it can become working harder with time as the mechanism becomes dirty, which is exactly the case of the Super Adventure S that I've been having. Anyway, in the rank, the least successful is the Triumph now, with a supposedly quick height adjustment that in fact may get stuck and make this adjustment a bar that you push or pull along with the windscreen bend dangerously. It looks like it can break. The idea is good, but the execution seems not so good. There is not that much buffeting behind the windscreen, but on all Tigers 1200 I am having wind coming from the bottom up straight into my helmet, which is quite unfavorable. In fact, as every time I end up with something in my eyes and have to cry it out, which on a motorcycle on the road is a no-no. That's 4 out of 10 points, and the 4th spot, since we don't count the KTM. Better is BMW R1250 GS that has one adjustment knob that is not quick nor easy to use, as it's on one side only, and you wonder every time which way you should turn it to do what you want it to do. So either make the windscreen go up or down. There's also not much buffeting, and so it gets 6 points out of 10. I feel that Multistrada V4 is better with a smoother and quicker adjustment system that makes it get ahead of the old GS with 7 points. But the true master here is the new generation of the GS that can have electric adjustment, which I am a huge fan of. It's not the category first, as an old Triumph Tiger Explorer used to have it, but then Triumph gave up for whatever reason. Here in the R1300 GS, you've got to set an adjustment function to a dedicated button, and then you can be using it. You may adjust the windscreen while its range is quite wide, and overall wind protection is really good. I think that it may be the only motorcycle in the whole segment now that I could ride without replacing its windscreen with something aftermarket. It is not absolutely perfect. I wish it could go 1 or 2 centimeters further up, but it's really very good. Well done, BMW. 8 points out of 10, and that's the winner. However, considering that my seat was lower, that would mean that I, in fact, choosing the normal one, which I would if I were to ride this GS, I would want it not 1 or 2 centimeters higher, but, well, 4 or 5 centimeters higher, which might change this a little bit. Keep that in mind. All right then, what about the super important element to everyone who doesn't like to cross on yellow light. So brakes. Here we've got some significant differences, with Tiger 1200 GT being definitely the least rider-friendly motorcycle, with its nervous front brake that makes the whole bike almost jump when squeezed quickly. It grabs way too suddenly and it puts you out of balance. You'll have to be very focused and need a lot of practice to get used to it. It's not a disaster, but based on what all others can do here, it's the worst in my opinion. It gets 5 out of 10 points, or it's the least best. Let's stay positive. Since we're talking about top bikes in the segment, Ducati Multistrada V4 in the S, to be specific, variant is better, as Ducati initially offered the non-S variant with worse brakes than the S, which they seem to have backed out of, or at least they don't say anything about that on their website anymore now. Ducati's brakes are easier to use for sure and generally do a good job in terms of ease of dosing and strength. 7 points out of 10, and the 4th place, as I feel that the bike being on the 3rd spot can have sharper brakes, along with one feature that lets you use them with more control and better feel. It's KTM 1290 Super Adventure S that can have its suspension equipped with that anti-dive function that helps the bike stay flatter during braking. It's not a night and day difference, but slowing down on it is pretty well controlled and the brakes are strong. 8 out of 10 points, and the 3rd spot for the KTM here, and the big GS line with that front telelever Evo. Those make the bike not dive almost at all. It introduces totally new experience to braking. It's truly amazing. Before our 1300 GS was introduced, the 1250 has had partly integrated brakes, so squeezing the front brake lever, the bike would activate the rear one too, while in the 1300 they work both ways, and also the rear brake can activate the front, and since it's supposed to be done in an intelligent way, I am a fan of this solution. Don't get worried, it's not like you step on the rear brake and the front suddenly will do most of the job. It's supposed to be, again, intelligent, so it's supposed not to do that. The thing is that I feel that our 1300 doesn't brake in an as impressive way as the 1250 does. So to me it appears that the new 1300 should get 9 out of 10 points, as it stays completely flat, which is great and allows for great control as well when slowing down. But the 1250 just impresses me more, to the point that I find braking hard on it simply, well, let's say it, fun. And I don't really feel that so much in the 1300 for reasons that I cannot fully comprehend, but I suspect most of the psychological aspect of the 1250 being a bigger motorcycle, or looking like a bigger motorcycle rather, and so it moving the way it does may impress at least me more. Imagine seeing a 160 kilogram dude sprinting right next to a 60 kilogram guy and keeping up with him just fine. Well, the bigger one would impress you more, wouldn't he? Now perhaps the same applies here, and the 1250 receives, well, let me get a little crazy here, 10 out of 10 again, and so that would be our winner. But I could understand that in lab tests, or not even lab tests, but just with measurements of a distance, the 1300 could brake from a certain speed in a shorter distance, as it's lighter, but still, feelings matter, even if they are a little bit deceiving sometimes. But I want to be transparent about it, as all the information would suggest that the R1300 GS should have more powerful and effective brakes. Let's move to onboard tech, and there is so much to talk about here in the case of these 5 top motorcycles, that if you want to see all that in depth, head to my individual honest reviews of these ones. They're again linked in the description of this video. Now I'll focus on mostly unique stuff and the differences the most, which there aren't so many. Now the last place with strong 7 out of 10 points goes to BMW R1250 GS, as this bike has everything that may appear as needed, but it doesn't have the new, more or less useful stuff others can have. To name what there is, or rather can be, it's keyless ignition and fuel cap that all of them can now have. There are riding modes, electronically adjustable suspension, and on top of that there is a drive shaft, which is here in BMW a big thing. There's a real anti-dive suspension that others don't have except for BMW and KTM trying. There can be LED cornering lights that also they all can have. Hill hold that helps you set up when standing and pointing uphill. Digital display, heated grips, and there can be even heated seats. That's a lot of stuff. But then the Triumph Tiger 1200 steps in with all that, except for the front anti-dive suspension, which is a mechanical, let's call it, solution. Now it steps in with the 8 points out of 10, and it adds to that a rear radar with a blind spot monitoring system that scans the road behind you on the sides and may warn you using the lights in the mirrors that there is a vehicle in your blind spot. It's nice, but it can only be there in the trim called Explorer that comes with a huge 30-liter fuel tank, which is I think, shame of a move, and I don't see the connection between the two, especially that the rear radar is purely contributing to our safety. Then from late 2023, Tiger 1200 can also have lowering suspension that can go down by 2 centimeters in the rear, which is nice for shorter riders who absolutely feel that they need a tall, huge motorcycle. Anyway, that limitation to the Explorer trim regarding bliss is one of the reasons why I place KTM 1290 Super Adventure S above it, also with 8 points. It doesn't have the radar in the rear, but has it in the front instead, and allows for using adaptive cruise control that can automatically maintain the distance before the motorcycle and the vehicle before it. It is fantastic in cars. I personally am not such a huge fan of it in motorcycles and wouldn't feel the need of using it myself. I would do it anyway, as it still gives you some margin just in case, but it wouldn't be something for me to look for or pay additionally for. In terms of the number of radars, KTM is there with the Triumph, but it doesn't have the lowering suspension. What it can have is the anti-dive function, and it's got an amazing display that actually explains to you all the options that you see there on it. It is quick, snappy, and the animations, unlike in Triumph, are not choppy. But then the Tiger, like BMW, has that drive shaft, which is still a mechanical solution, while KTM only has simple chain. So it gets complicated, but what needs to be said is that KTM really feels more modern mostly because of that display that we deal with at all times. So it's a pretty important thing. Now, the one in Triumph also loads extremely long, being quicker only than the one in Honda Africa Twin that basically loads when you're already crossing the border to Africa. Well, see how that worked well. Ducati Multistrada is before these two with 9 points out of 10, and on the second spot with Ducati equipping it with a 2-cylinder deactivation system to keep the bike cooler. It doesn't help much. But then it scores by having both radars. No drive shaft either, no suspension lowering or anti-dive front suspension function, but man, everybody talks about those radars nowadays, so there you have it. Its display is nothing fancy, but it also doesn't annoy like the one in Triumph. And now the first place goes to the newcomer, the BMW R1300 GS, that has also both radars. Like Ducati, it has a full suspension lowering system in the front and in the rear, more than Triumph and Harley, also as by 3 centimeters instead of 2. It also can lower itself just when you open the side stand, and it can also raise itself once you start opening the center stand. And so it makes it really easy to put on the center stand. It's got an electric windscreen that beats it all to me, but then you cannot quickly access all the riding modes for some reason. And it only lets you use one of 2 suspension modes, while in fact there are 3 of them, which is, well, bloody super strange to me. That windscreen also goes down every time you switch the bike off and takes electricity and just gathers your attention for no reason. Then it automatically goes up once you start riding again. And the display is basically unchanged to the older GS, and well, it's fine, but with such a huge change after years, they could have, let's say, add some more display modes than just one different one. The bike can also warn you if it believes you might be unaware that you're approaching another vehicle too quickly. So there's a lot of new stuff to BMW and a lot of stuff that its competitors had before. Now BMW has it too in this GS. If you want everything that's there, BMW R1300 GS is waiting for you and winning in this category of comparison. The ninth field to compare them in is the subjective feeling of weight. Why subjective? Well, everything is subjective, but here we all can quickly see what the weight of each of these motorcycles is, but it won't tell us anything about where this weight is located and how the shape of the motorcycle, the width, the position of its handlebar, and all other elements that we control those motorcycles with are positioned. So in the end of the day, it's down to testing it and just feeling. The heaviest feeling and the hardest to manage at low speeds in terms of weight to me is KTM 1290 Super Adventure S. For the record, it weighs around 240 kilograms. KTM doesn't state it on their website and some other data, and there's only dry weight, which is incompatible with other manufacturers' data. So this is an estimate of 240 kilograms. 6 out of 10 from me, and we move on to the next one that appears lighter in real life with 7 points out of 10. There is a Ducati Multistrada V4. I've ridden the V4S that comes with additional equipment and weighs 243 kilograms, but yeah, it feels easier to manage than the KTM, mostly I believe because of a wider handlebar that makes it slightly easier to keep the bike upright. Then on the third spot, we've got the Triumph, also with 7 points like the Ducati, as they are quite similar, and I wouldn't really be able to tell a very significant or even a visible difference between the two. However, Tiger 1200 somehow feels more approachable to me. Tiger 1200 GT Pro that I've been testing weighs 245 kilograms, and that's interesting. The heavier the bike, the lighter it appears to me. That looks strange, but then it's not about the sheer weight here. And also 2 kilograms of difference, that's not even 1% in the case of these bikes. So other things matter so much more when it comes to feeling their weight. In the second place with 8 out of 10 points sits BMW R1300 GS that originally weighs the least in its base form is 237 kilograms, but how much it weighs in the configuration that I've had with electric windscreen and other accessories, we will not know. It had a lighter aftermarket exhaust though, so it might have just as well been around those 237 kilograms with fluids, all of that with fluids. This BMW feels to me lighter than the bikes mentioned before, and this time it's in line with the data. But then also with 8 out of 10, there's a good old R1250 GS that's, well, you guessed it, like the heaviest out of the bunch on paper, as it weighs in at 249 kilograms in its base form. Counterintuitive, but then just take a look at that unusual engine and you realize that this means that the weight is not only very low, but it also spreads to the sides, like a long stick that you're holding when walking on a hanging rope, like we all do every weekend, don't we? It helps to balance the bike, and when it comes to riding, already from 1 kilometer per hour, this thing feels like mind controlled, and all that weight pretty much disappears. It is incredible, and also here I believe that it's still this psychological aspect of it impressing me personally so much. In reality, with our eyes closed in a blind test and just walking with the bike, we would perhaps say that the 1300 feels lighter, maybe, but then steering the bike and seeing that massive body of the 1250 underneath you and knowing the way it rides, it is just so unreal that it again wins to me, even over the 1300 here. But don't let it discourage you, and it doesn't also discourage me from appreciating the 1300's weight savings that are a big accomplishment by BMW, and also they enhance performance and braking as lower weight improves both naturally. None of those feels overly heavy, and there's a reason why these are the top motorcycles in the segment in my opinion, and why they are put against the new R1300 GS. They are very good in most of these categories. Now a quick, very subjective one, and so engine and exhaust sound. To me, BMWs lose by a mile here. As the Boxer engine sound totally doesn't match my taste. Some say that the mechanical noises are more obvious in the 1300. I cannot confirm it as my press bike had an aftermarket exhaust, but keeping this in mind and that it's not the most beautiful sound either, it lands on the last 5th position with 2 out of 10 points. R1250 GS may have less mechanical noises, I'm not sure about that, but it sounds to me just as terribly with the stock exhaust, also getting 2 out of 10 points, but on the 4th position. Now, moving to nicely sounding motorcycles, I would put Ducati Multistrada V4 on the 3rd position, and keep in mind that here also Ducati gave me a motorcycle with an aftermarket exhaust. It wouldn't sound much better than stock, and it would scream with extremely high pitching noise. at high revs, which I don't enjoy very much, but at idle and low revs, it can be nice. I'm giving it 6 out of 10 and moving to the Tiger 1200. That's the opposite. As at idle, it's so gentle that you can barely hear it, which is a disadvantage to me in this particular case. But then at high revs, it gets surprisingly awesome and brutal, even with a stock exhaust. It actually would encourage me to push it just to hear that sound of its 3-cylinder engine. I'm giving it 6 out of 10 as that sound at idle is just way too quiet to make any sort of impression some may like in a motorcycle. KTM 1290 Super Adventure S is better to me than them all, as it's a V-twin with a fairly nice rumble at all times. It's way too quiet with stock exhaust, but this can be easily fixed. The note suits me at the most, and so I'm giving it 7 out of 10 here. The next category is design, which is just as subjective, so I'll be very brief. The last spot on my list is reserved for the new BMW R1300 GS, as I'm from the camp of, oh no, what's wrong with its face? That radar bump on its forehead hurts my eyes, and looking at the front and at that lamp just slightly from the side, well, it's not enjoyable to me. The overall shape is smooth and I think it generally resembles a GS, but I can only give it 4 out of 10 here. What's better and more conservative, but not pretty still in my books, is a Triumph Tiger 1200 with 5 points out of 10. I find it a little bit too boring for such a cool and competent motorcycle. BMW R1250 GS is generally not called pretty, but it's got consistent and rough design everywhere, and it can look tough. I generally like this style, while realizing it may not be a beauty with that asymmetrical front lamp. 6 out of 10 from me. And so we move to Ducati Multistrada V4. That can look pretty with those slim girly eyes looking at you. Here my only reservation is the side profile that makes it suddenly look like an enduro motorcycle with that massive tank and engine area and then a fairly small butt. Also 6 out of 10 points from me here, but a spot before R1250 GS. The prettiest to me is the KTM 1290 Super Adventure S that appears consistent in its design. It looks to me powerful, modern, and with a front lamp that so many consider ugly. I give it 8 out of 10, but you can disregard everything within this area as there is nothing objective here. Now, taking a look at ground clearance, the least is provided by BMW, as on one hand they don't even tell us how much there is in the new R1300 GS, so it's basically disqualified here and we cannot count it. But then R1250 GS has only 18.5 or 7.28 inches, which is not very impressive considering the competitors. Then Tiger 1200 GT is on the third spot. That gives us more at 20 centimeters or 7.87 inches. Then Ducati Multistrada on the second position with a lot as 22 centimeters or 8.66 inches, and the most comes from the KTM with 22.4 centimeters or 8.82 inches. Now that was quick, and so will be fuel tank comparison, this time with no scores and just the numbers, as it doesn't even automatically have to mean that it's better. We could say that about total range, but it would require identical testing environment, which I cannot provide. What pretty much everyone knows is that Ducati Multistrada V4 is not very fuel efficient. Now for the numbers, BMW R1300 GS has 19 liters, 1250 has 20 liters or 30 in its adventure variant. KTM 1290 Super Adventure comes with 23 liters. Tiger 1200 GT has 20 or 30 liters when it's in the Explorer trim, and the Multistrada has 22 or 30 liters when it's in its Rally edition. Drivetrains differ as well, as both BMWs and the Triumph come with awesome drive shafts, while KTM and Ducati are using standard chains. Those two are the lazy ones. I will always value a drive shaft more than a chain, even considering that a failure may be more expensive to fix and will require a professional service, while having a motorcycle is more expensive than not having a motorcycle, so I'm not sure there's a very strong argument there. But now a tricky one. Value for money, which depends on how much money you've got, obviously. So again, this is my point of view, and there are three camps consisting of these motorcycles here. The first is the lone Ducati Multistrada V4, which in the S variant that seems to make the most sense is quite expensive in comparison, which is not miles ahead of the rest in terms of features and equipment. I would call it overpriced from my perspective, and I would give it 4 out of 10 points on the last spot. Then I would put KTM and the new BMW R1300 together with 7 out of 10 points, and on the position 4th and 3rd, as they are still quite expensive, but well, to me, considering what they offer, they seem alright. And the third camp would be BMW R1250 GS and Tiger 1200. That would be the best deals in terms of value for money, getting both 8 out of 10 points. They are not cheap, especially if you add options to the BMW, but there is really a lot of great or even the best stuff that you're getting for that, hence value. To me, the Triumph seems to be the best deal in the Pro trim, even though it's not exceeding in any category except for seat and position comfort and suspension. That's still something. All right, the last one. So X Factor. Which bike generates the most emotion and makes you want to hop on it and just ride the most? In the 5th place, there is the Tiger 1200, which does almost everything all right, but doesn't exceed anywhere that much except for, let's say, in terms of cool stuff, sound at high RPM. But overall, to me, it is a 5 out of 10 here. More exciting overall seems to be the Ducati, with more power and overall performance when pushed hard. And it's a Ducati, so you can have the red and enjoy the Italian heritage of it and just not give a crap about anything else. I would give it a 6 out of 10. I understand that appeal. It's on the 4th place here in my rank. I would be more excited to ride the new BMW R1300 GS, especially with its electrically adjustable windscreen. How stupid that sounds, I know, but that's just how it is. It handles well, has decent performance, it does stuff very well with basically no weak points, speaking as objectively as possible. Handling would be the most exciting feature to me of this bike still, but then maybe behind that electric windscreen again. But then I feel still more impressed by how the older R1250 GS handles and looks on top of that, and how it brakes, and that it appears more like the legendary Boxer GS motorcycles. To me, that's more exciting, and so I can just, well, I'm just gonna give it 7 out of 10 points and place it on the 2nd spot, right behind the KTM, which is in the S version. Still not my favorite, that is reserved for the R variant, but here this engine is still unbelievably enjoyable. If we're talking about excitement, standing behind the X Factor category, this is it. It beats everything else here, and I really like the way it looks and can sound with an aftermarket exhaust. It is my winner in this group, also with 7 out of 10 points. If it would handle and brake as well as either of the BMWs, it would be a 9 or 10 out of 10 in terms of excitement, so the X Factor. All right then, at this successful end, there are 2 areas to sum up that will define which bike may suit your riding style and environment the best, if you like the things in the similar way to how I like them. The first summary is how good a given motorcycle is in the city, and then as a long distance tourer, both based on the previous categories. So the least good, let me phrase it this way, in the city is the KTM 1290 Super Adventure S. That's too hard for me to steer, and so in the end it doesn't handle city riding as well as the rest, in my opinion. It gets a mediocre 5 out of 10 points here. To me, a Ducati Multistrada V4 would be better here and already fine for city riding with 6 out of 10 points. It feels slightly lighter, more manageable, and willing to cooperate at low speeds. The issue here is that it can get way too hot, and this could be problematic. Also with 6 out of 10 points is the Tiger 1200 GT, that appears that tiny bit easier to control at lower speeds, just slightly more friendly, which matters during tight maneuvers. With 7 out of 10 points comes the new BMW R1300 GS. That is a compact motorcycle now, visually too. It can lower itself, enabling shorter riders to get a firmer support with their feet when stopping the traffic lights, like the updated Tiger 1200 by the way, but it handles better at lower speeds than all previous ones. It is better balanced and easier to deal with in tight traffic and low speeds. That is a very strong 2nd place in the overall assessment. So the king remains on its throne with a plush environment, more body of itself around you, which somehow may also affect the feeling of safety, power and confidence in city riding, but it also handles and brakes in an amazing way. Combining it with everything about this bike and how impressive of a combination it is, this is my winner as a city bike that can make you ride like crazy and very irresponsibly in the city. It's getting a 9 out of 10 and it's just so encouraging to play with. That's my perspective. Now what about the touring along with high-speed riding? The last out of the group here would be for me the KTM because of the foot pegs located high, a super uncomfortable seat, and chain drive that's a pain to deal with. Suspension comfort is fine, the engine is absolutely competent, no vibration, and I cannot tell you about the stock windscreen, which is the only thing to skip here. That's the 5th spot with 6 out of 10 points. Then 7 out of 10 go to Ducati Multistrada that has a very good seat and very good wind protection, decent suspension comfort still, and only struggles with a known issue of consuming a lot of fuel. It's also more stiff than the KTM and some others. It also uses a chain, so very long trips will require you to carry a chain spray or install an automatically lubricating device, but I would choose it, I think, over the KTM. Now, with a higher score than Ducati, so with 8 out of 10 points, there is the new BMW R1300 GS on my list. It's got a comfortable seat. I've ridden again the one with the lowered seat, unfortunately. The position is okay, with an exception of the foot pegs being too high for me, and I would feel cramped on it. In terms of sitting, I would prefer the Ducati until it comes to suspension comfort and the wind protection, where BMW rocks, especially with that electrically adjustable windscreen, which is an option, by the way. If the foot pegs position would be bothering you, try replacing seat with a taller one. Well, this could solve the issue. It will impact the wind protection. On the other hand, may also force you to bend forward, which is not what everybody likes, including me. Then only handlebar risers can help. Handling at high speeds is also better, in my opinion, than Ducati's, and for sure better than KTM's. But the safer choice for me for long rides would be the Tiger 1200 GT because of its super plush suspension, an amazing stock seat along with a whole position on the bike with no issues with foot pegs in my case at all. The only downside would be wind protection here. That's not great and would definitely require me to replace the windscreen, but this is also a fairly small thing to do. It also cannot move electrically, but there is also a drive shaft. It's going strong head to head with the BMWs, also with 8 out of 10 points. It won't handle as well, but it's really good and neutral at speeds when cornering. I will be sleeping well after recommending this motorcycle for longer rides. And here again, the best one to me is BMW R1250 GS that offers a better sitting position than the 1300 to me. It seems more secure, more confident, and gives me a feeling of safety by being generally larger. Not everybody likes that, and some will appreciate the smaller 1300 GS. To me, it appears as better handling at high speeds as well. It may appear softer and perhaps more bouncing around at times. It's got worse wind protection than the 1300, but better than the one in Triumph. The seat also feels less comfortable than the one in the Triumph, but it's still possible to fix it. The feeling of security and capabilities is stronger in the 1250 to me than in all others here, and this would be my pick also for long rides. So that's a 9 out of 10. Now, wow. After all this, if I were to sum it up in my own very, very personal ranking without summing up any points, as I promised, in the 5th place I would put the KTM 1290 Super Adventure S. Then I would say that I would be feeling safer recommending you a Ducati Multistrada V4 in the S variant, then the Triumph Tiger 1200 GT in the Pro trim in the 3rd place as a very good all-rounder, but not exceeding anywhere as much as the new BMW R1300 GS in terms of tech, in terms of handling, in terms of brakes, and the number 1 still would be reserved for the outgoing BMW R1250 GS as a very different animal to the new R1300 GS. It feels to me more gentle and more encouraging at the same time. It is less technologically advanced, but with some advantages in the area of sitting and handling, I think. It also always will have good brakes, which refers to that question mark that BMW introduced in the new R1300 GS, which may influence the trust in whether this bike really consists of all the best that BMW can offer. Well, we know that the answer is no. if you have to pay for better brakes. Anyhow, please let me know about what you guys ride and why you chose what you chose. Now, for the record, it's not like some of these motorcycles are good or bad. No, they will suit different people, different riding styles, and I've shown you what it looks like from my own personal perspective after having ridden them all. And also, am I saying that I like the 1250 GS more than a 10 years newer 1300? Yes, to me it is more fun, but to a million others who thought that a big GS seems too big, this is now an option. It's now closer to BMW S1000 XR and sort of blends it with the R1250 GS, leaving away how overwhelming the GS, the big one, could have been for some. Also, people who would otherwise choose a smaller F, now 900 and previously 850 GS, may come and realize that this one doesn't necessarily feel like a step up in terms of size now. I believe it may appeal now to more riders that want it all and also don't want it to appear so big. Some that like it big may not find it so great now, but if an adventure is coming, well, we will see. So what's the most important in an adventure motorcycle to you guys? Please let us all know. Thanks for watching. I hope you found it useful. Subscribe for more reviews and direct comparisons.